GoForThe2.com and with the Week 10 college football predictions. Week number 9 did not disappoint. Great games in the top 25, and it really sets the stage for an amazing weekend of college football this coming Saturday. Going to be about 7 picks in the video. If you want all the selections of the top 25 under-the-radar games, tune in to Carver and Lisi every Monday through Friday, sportsgridradio.com or Sirius Channel 159, 10 p.m. to midnight, and then the College Football Studio Show, College Football Today, 9 a.m. to noon Eastern, Sirius Channel 159 or sportsgridradio.com, or you could tune in live in terms of sportsgrid.com for the video portion. Let's jump right into the selections for week number 10 in the Big 12. We have 2 games. Let's start with the big one in Kansas State between the Wildcats and Texas Longhorns. Texas coming out of a bye week. They've won 5 straight in the series against the Wildcats. Picked up this victory last year, 22-17. They rushed for over 200 yards on the front 7 and wore down the Kansas State front 7 in that ball game. That was a game there entering that matchup. You look at Texas, they had lost 6 straight and then ended the year on an up note by shutting down the Kansas State offense in the second half. They were able to control the line of scrimmage, time of possession, and they held on for the 22-17 fourth quarter win over the Kansas State Wildcats. You look at Texas right now, they're averaging around 183 rushing yards on the ground, 5.1 yards per carry. They're coming out of a bye week. That should benefit Quinn Ewers. That should benefit the offensive philosophy by Steve Sarkisian. But let's not count out the Texas front 7. They're playing very well this year, holding opposing offenses to only 121 rushing yards per game, 3.3 yards per carry, and I think that's the matchup going up against either Adrian Martinez or Will Howard for the Kansas State Wildcats. Kansas State dominated Oklahoma State last week. Will Howard stepped up, 296 passing yards through the air, 4 touchdowns. They made Spencer Sanders and that offense completely one-dimensional, shut down the rushing attack as well of Dominic Richardson. But this is a different animal and a different offensive philosophy from Steve Sarkisian. I expect Steve Sarkisian to utilize his playmakers, especially on the perimeter. Look for Rayshon Johnson, look for Bijan Robinson to be incorporated in terms of the short to intermediate passing game. And I think they can pound the rock at will on the front 7 of Kansas State. Laying 3 points on the road. I like Texas to win this ball game anywhere from 7 to 10 points Saturday night in Manhattan. Another ball game takes place in Fort Worth. Early kick between TCU and Texas Tech. TCU has won 3 straight in the series by an average margin of victory of 13 points per game. Absolutely dominated the Red Raiders last year by 20 plus. Picked up this victory 31, won by 20 plus points on the road last year. You have Max Duggan hitting on all cylinders, through for over 290 yards last week. They scored on almost every possession against West Virginia's defense. They were laying 7.5 on the road and won that ball game by 10 points. A quality road win. A lot of people were thinking West Virginia would step up. They shut down the rushing attack of the Mountaineers, especially in the second half, and come back home for a potential game next week against the Texas Longhorns. But you look at Texas Tech right now. This is still an athletic defense, even though they gave up 231 rushing yards to Baylor. I just think it was a bad matchup going up against a Baylor offense. That was a more physical, run-heavy type of offense with Baylor and Richard Reese in terms of the physicality of the rushing attack. They like to rush it up the middle in terms of the A and B gaps. A little more of a finesse offense with Sonny Dykes and their quarterback, Max Duggan. I actually think Texas Tech matches up very well from a defensive perspective. I think they can force Max Duggan into maybe working down the field methodically, and I still like the Texas Tech passing attack going up against the secondary of TCU. I think they could strike the upset. Calling for the Red Raiders plus the 9.5, but also like them on the road to potentially strike the upset in Fort Worth. Think they're in this ballgame from start to finish. They still have some playmakers in terms of Rick Thompson and Taj Brooks that can run the football. I also think they can catch the football which could cause some concerns for the TCU defense. I like Texas Tech plus the 9.5 points on the road Saturday afternoon. Two big battles in terms of the SEC. We'll start with the big one in terms of Georgia and Tennessee. Georgia has won 5 straight in the series, the last 4 by an average margin of victory of 25.5 points per game. We saw Tennessee start fast last week, absolutely boat race the Kentucky Wildcats 44-6. They started fast with a big play to Jalen Hyatt to put the Tennessee offense up 7-0. Never looked back. Forced some turnovers against Will Levis. 3 critical interceptions. They shut down Chris Rodriguez and took the running game out of the offensive philosophy for Mark Stoops. They held Kentucky in check for 107 rushing yards on the ground. Will Levis only threw for 98 yards through the air, and now they go on the road potentially. Before this video comes out, they might be the number 1 team in terms of the college football playoff rankings in terms of the Tennessee Volunteers. How does Tennessee handle that on the road in terms of Athens? When you look at the spread perspective, this line was 12.5 about a week ago. It's now 8.5 points. You look at Georgia last week, they did not cover as a 23.5 point favorite in that matchup against Anthony Richardson in Florida, 142-20. They pounded the rock for 238 yards on the ground. Now they are now 4-0 this year every time they rush for over 200 yards, and more importantly, have won those games by 30 plus, right in the area, 28 points per game. When you look at Georgia in terms of 2016, every time they rush the football for over 200, they're an amazing 40-0 against FCS and FBS opponents. That'll be the mindset, I believe, going up against Tennessee in this ballgame. You have a very high-octane offense when Hendon Hooker is going into a true road environment. This is their toughest test outside of Baton Rouge on a Saturday morning. Remember, that was an early kick in Baton Rouge. This is a different animal in terms of Sanford Stadium. You look at Georgia's defense last week. They stepped up with 3 critical sacks against Anthony Richardson entering that ballgame. They only had 7 sacks on the year, but more importantly, third down defense for Georgia playing lights out. They're holding opposing offenses to 28% of third down conversions. Meanwhile, Stetson Bennett and that offense are converting 52% of their third down opportunities. They have Brock Bowers, one of the most athletic tight ends in all of college football. I think Georgia looks to run the football, keep Hendon Hooker on the sidelines, and I like Georgia to cover this number in a big way, laying 8.5 points. Not to take away from what Josh Heupel and Tennessee have done up until this point, I just think the more complete offense and defensive lines entering this ballgame is the Georgia offense. The Georgia defense as well, I think they step up, force some turnovers over Hendon Hooker, and I think Georgia wins this ballgame anywhere from 14 to 17 points over the Volunteers. The other big battle takes place in terms of Baton Rouge. We have Alabama on the road laying 13 points to Brian Kelly. Both teams coming out of a bye week. This game could come down to both rushing attacks. You look at Alabama right now, averaging 211 yards on the ground with Jahmyr Gibbs. They have stepped up in recent weeks, really relied on his versatility and athleticism. And on the flip side, you look at LSU, they got right in a big way, pounding the rock for 200-plus yards against Ole Miss. You look at the front seven of LSU right now. They held Ole Miss. That was an offense in Ole Miss when they played a couple of weeks ago that was averaging 261 rushing yards against opposing offenses. They held them in check in the second half, only allowed 117 rushing yards in that ball game, made Jackson Dart and that offense completely one-dimensional. And if you look back to this ball game last year where LSU was a 29.5 point underdog, they were in striking distance last year on the road in Tuscaloosa with Max Johnson down 6. They got it inside the 10, just couldn't knock down and score that touchdown, and Alabama prevailed. But if you're LSU, this is the main reason why you got Brian Kelly. With an extra week of preparation, with a red-hot quarterback in terms of Jaden Daniels, with 2 big play wide receivers in Jeray Jenkins and now Kayshon Boutte playing in your house, catching 13 points. This is why you got BK in terms of Baton Rouge. I like them. I think they could potentially strike the upset over Alabama. I know Alabama has dominated the series in recent years outside of 2019. They've won 9 of the last 10, but at the end of the day, I think LSU could be live. I think they run the football. Also, keep in mind, you look at the weather report. There's potential scattered thunderstorms scheduled for Saturday night in Baton Rouge. Whichever team can run the football better most likely will win. I'll take my shot with the home team. Jaden Daniels and LSU cover this number Saturday night in Tiger Stadium. Let's keep it in the SEC. We have two other ball games, Auburn and Miss State. You look at this ball game last year, Miss State had an unbelievable come-from-behind win on the Plains in Auburn. They trailed by 18-plus points, pulled the ball game out 43-34. Today we get the news that Brian Harsin is in fact fired for Auburn. The interim coach is former running back Cadillac Williams, that was there with Ronnie Brown and Jason Campbell. So it's one of Auburn's own leading the Auburn Tigers on the road to face off against Will Rogers and Mike Leach. They're catching 13.5 points. This line opened up at 10.5. Balloon now 3 points with an interim staff. Are they checked in or are they checked out? We liked Arkansas last week because of the physicality of the rushing attack, and Arkansas stepped up in a big way and pounded the rock yet again for over 200 yards. You look at the last 3 games for Auburn's defense, right? Georgia, they gave up over 200. They gave up 448 to Ole Miss and over 200 now to Arkansas. The good news is that Miss State is a pass-heavy offense, averaging 321 passing yards through the air, only 89 rushing yards on the ground. You know what? I think Auburn could get right here. With an interim coach, Robbie Ashford played very well, completed 24 of 33 passes, and threw for 285 yards in that ballgame. They converted 11 of 19 third down conversions, and this offense from a rushing attack is still averaging well over about 4.5 yards per carry. I like Tank Bigsby to step up in this ballgame. I think they run a lot in terms of Tank Bigsby. Look to neutralize Will Rogers. Cadillac Williams is a former running back. I think they utilized the rushing attack to potentially keep this game very close in the fourth quarter, catching 13.5 points. I like Auburn as a live dog in Starkville this coming weekend. Another big SEC battle, Arkansas and Liberty. Liberty has been unbelievable underdog. They covered a couple of weeks ago, catching 7, dominated BYU. They rushed for over 300 yards on that front 7. And the secondary of Liberty is leading the way. They've only allowed 9 passing touchdowns, 54% completion percentage, 11 interceptions on the season. That's going to be the recipe to potentially cover this line Saturday afternoon in Fayetteville. But I still think you have a very hot team in terms of the Arkansas Razorbacks. KJ Jefferson rushed for a touchdown last week. He also threw for one. He's playing very well in the scheme. This is a very heavy offensive line in terms of the Arkansas Razorbacks. The last time Liberty played an SEC West team was last year with Matt Corral and Ole Miss. They dominated in terms of the first half, built a 24-0 lead before hanging on and getting the win and cover over Hugh Freeze in this ballgame. I just think this is a bad spot for Liberty. I know they're coming out of a bye week. I know they've stepped up against ACC and potential opponents like BYU, but I don't put a lot of weight in terms of that BYU victory because we see BYU in terms of where they are right now. They lost yet again to East Carolina last week. They're just a team in disarray after they started very fast. The schedule is caught up to BYU. On the flip side, we have an offense in Arkansas that is starting to hit stride. They're averaging 268 rushing yards over their last 3 games. I like KJ Jefferson. This line opened up at 14.5. Money is coming in on Liberty right now because they're covering spreads as an underdog. I like Arkansas to pound this team by anywhere from 21 plus. I think Arkansas is the more complete team. Liberty, dynamic season. Hugh Freeze, dynamic coach. But I think they're up against it from an offensive defensive line perspective. Arkansas covers this number. Big Ten battle taking place, total contrast in styles. We have Iowa taking on Purdue. Purdue has won 2 straight. We saw Iowa get the 33-13 victory at home as an 11-point favorite over Northwestern. They pounded the rock for 173 yards on Northwestern's front 7. Throw statistics out the window. I'm going with the rushing attack of Iowa, hoping that it can continue 2 weeks in a row. This is a revenge spot for Kirk Ferentz. He's lost 2 straight to Purdue. I know Jeff Brom has owned him in recent years, but I'm going to think that the rushing attack continues on the road in West Lafayette. Still like the front 7 of Iowa, only giving up around 93 rushing yards per game. They play very solid third down defense. I think Iowa strikes the upset against the Boilermakers, catching the 4.5 points in this ballgame. Iowa's live with the points in this battle. Those are the picks for this coming weekend. We'll break them down in terms of the Big 12. I like Texas minus the 3.5, Texas Tech plus the 9.5. SEC, we have 4 picks. We have Georgia minus the 8.5, LSU plus the 13, Auburn plus the 13.5, and Arkansas minus the 13.5. The 13 this weekend, 13.5, and Iowa plus the 4.5. So those are the 7 picks. I'll go through them again. I'm battling a little bit of a cold, so I apologize, a little laryngitis. But we got Texas minus the 3, Texas Tech plus the 9.5. We have the SEC. We have Georgia minus the 8.5, LSU plus the 13, Arkansas minus the 13.5, Auburn plus the 13.5, and then Iowa plus the 4.5. Your picks for Week 10. I'll see you on Saturday.